Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where even though Kathleen Kennedy has boasted about her Star Wars writing team many times, especially the fact that there are a lot of women on it, they don't seem to be doing their job. What are they doing over there? Because another outside writer has had been brought in to this time help fix Episode 9 before it rolls before cameras. So I guess maybe they're getting a little better at this, right? I mean, ideally, you wouldn't need extensive revisions. Although, to be fair, they have been thrown a bit of a curveball with the tragic passing of Carrie Fisher. But anyway, Jack Thorne from the UK has been brought on to help rewrite, no one knows how extensively, Colin Trevorrow and Derek Connolly's Episode 9 script. Colin Trevorrow, of course, being the Jurassic World director, and Derek Connolly, his frequent writing partner. We're going to talk about them in a moment, but I think before we do that, I think I want to take a little bit of a sidebar and congratulate Rian Johnson for seemingly needing no help, whereas everyone else has on Star Wars. So I don't know if that's amazing or if it means he's even more of a mess than everyone else, right? Or at least maybe he and Kathleen Kennedy really get along. She likes what Rian Johnson is cooking. And, you know, it's interesting because when they did the Vanity Fair article, many of us were concerned and surprised that it was revealed that there were no plans going forward, even skeletal plans, you know, like a series Bible post The Force Awakens. Rian had like carte blanche to make up whatever he wanted. You know, J.J. Abrams had left no roadmap. The story team from Star Wars apparently had no plans. Like, they didn't even say, like, we had plans, but then Rian really changed our mind with a different direction to go in. They were like, what do you want to do? Which is really weird considering, you know, there should be some structure to at least every trilogy in the series. You should have some idea where you're going. So, J.J. Abrams, of course, you know, potentially J.J. Abrams built a really crappy foundation for everything, and maybe Rian Johnson shored it up. But Colin Trevorrow and Derek Connolly are having trouble building on it. Very interesting indeed. But anyway, who is this writer that they've brought on? Well, Jack Thorne is from the UK again, and he seems like a softer, more emotional writer, maybe to deal with the Carrie Fisher situation. He's written The Wonder, which is that Wonder, that Jacob Tremblay movie coming up about the little boy dealing with, you know, it's like the Mel Gibson movie, The Man Without a Face, like that kind of a thing. But in middle school, you know, odd choice. We'll see how it does. But he's also, you know, if you want to feel a little better about his sci-fi chops, he's working on his Dark Materials for the BBC, and also Philip K. Dick's Electric Sheep for Channel 4. But nobody's seen these things yet, so who knows if he's any good at it. I continue to be surprised. Like, for instance, they were talking about The Dark Tower recently, and they were like, what went wrong in the trades? And they were like, this director we talked about yesterday looked great on paper. He did A Royal Affair. And it's weird because I think anybody would look at him on paper and say he's a horrible choice. He's never done a big movie like this before, and he's only really done A Royal Affair, which wasn't a particularly arresting film visually. So, I mean, he seemed like a horrible choice on paper, I think, to almost everyone. And that, you know, goes back to the fact that studio executives often don't consume this material that they're producing, so they're not very good at putting it together because they don't know what the audience wants because they're not the audience. But anyway, this guy's been hired to help out Colin Trevorrow and Derek Connolly. And Colin Trevorrow, while I was doing my research on this, I saw an older article from, you know, when the Book of Henry came out, and he was really, you know, very really defending himself aggressively, I guess that's the right word, against all the criticisms, not only for the Book of Henry, but whether or not he was a mistake for Episode 9. And he was saying a lot of really weird, trumped up BS. I was like, wow, like there's a big cloud of BS around you, Colin Trevorrow, that's really shocking and should be a huge red flag, or I guess in this case a brown flag, for anyone who would hire you. He was like, Kathleen Kennedy has been my mentor my whole life. And I was like, oh, wow, I guess that's why you got hired, because you guys had a relationship. And then he continued with his quote and said, and I discovered that when I met her for the first time, and it felt like she was my mentor for my whole life because we're just on the same wavelength. And I'm just like, wow, I certainly hope that you didn't say that in the meeting and Kathleen Kennedy would fall for that. I was just like, but I mean, at least he's really in, he seems to be in deep with Kathleen Kennedy, a mistake that Phil Lord and Chris Miller, of course, made by being on the outs with her. So so I thought that was I thought that was like some of the worst kissing up to a boss I've ever seen. And I was like really surprised. Like it was so clunky and obvious that it made me worry about his other decision-making abilities. And I think people felt that way after seeing The Book of Henry. And they were like, how could you make this film? And he was defending that film and saying, you know, he was at a foreign film festival and he was like, I just want to thank everybody here for allowing artists to make their art, because in America that's really difficult right now. We're just judged all the time. And it's like, yeah, you are judged. This is a multi-million-dollar business. You know, tickets have to be sold. And The Book of Henry, if it had any artistic, I mean, people were rooting for him after Jurassic World. So if it had any artistic credibility whatsoever, people would have pointed it out. The problem is that it didn't. It was just a huge clunker. It was as obvious as his brown-nosing to Kathleen Kennedy. That it was a mistake. So I don't like him trying to say that people aren't being fair to him as an artist, as a scapegoat. I mean, I think that the media, when an effort is made, are pretty, you know, they try to, you know, I always do, and I think a lot of people try and, you know, give people the benefit of the doubt. The real problem is that, you know, no one's making any effort with some of these movies. That's the problem. I mean, even in the Emoji Movie, I called out what I thought were good aspects of the film. And so he also said he didn't like the way the Han Solo situation went down, and that, you know, people were clickbaity and they were, you know, injecting politics into something that's very personal. And it's like, come on. I think that we got a lot of information about what went down with the Han Solo situation, and I think it made a lot of sense. And it was just, it was, you know, who felt they were bigger. And Lord and Chris Miller bet that they were bigger than Kathleen Kennedy, and they lost that bet. And that's just the way it goes. And I think you could see from the way Ron Howard is totally bowing his head to the Star Wars people that that's what they wanted. You know, and Ron Howard has no problem towing the line publicly. You know, he is just like, he's doing a lot of online groveling, and, you know, we'll see how that works out for him. But, you know, I think it's really important for everybody to remember that it is a business, and I think that clickbaiting is really bad, but I don't think that there was any clickbaiting going on with the Han Solo situation. And so I don't like people using fake news, clickbaiting, you know, ooh, Rotten Tomatoes is evil as cover, you know, like, because I think it clouds the argument when those things are legitimately bad. So I've got a lot of problems with Colin Trevorrow, and I hope, let's see what Jack Thorne can do, but I'm getting a little worried about Star Wars 9. But what do you think? Write your thoughts down below about that. Let's talk about the next story of the day. That was a crazy one. What a mess. All right, so the other thing is that the Hellboy reboot continues to take shape. I think this is in very good shape. David Harbour from Stranger Things, the sheriff, is going to be Hellboy. I hope they don't bury him under too much makeup. You know, that's Ron Perlman's whole thing. Great. But I think David Harbour is a very interesting actor, and I'd like to be able to actually see him. So we'll see. And then also it would be something a little different than what Guillermo del Toro and Perlman did. Neil Marshall is directing. Love this guy. You might recall he was my choice before Patty Jenkins for Wonder Woman. He did The Descent, this fabulous horror movie with women, you know, spelunking or whatever. And then also he's directed some of the best Game of Thrones episodes. So I'm very excited. I think this is fabulous. And then this was in the news yesterday because Ian McShane has signed on to play Professor Broom, Hellboy's adoptive father. Yeah, you know what? I mean, it's nice. Nobody's going to run away from Ian McShane, but I don't think anyone's going to run full force toward him. I mean, he's like, if you're on the fence about seeing a movie, you might be like, oh, I like Ian McShane, I'll go. But I mean, he's so the same these days. I mean, he's done the John Wick movies, you know, Deadwood, he was very good there, obviously, made that show. But he's been, I think, playing the same role ever since. He was in American Gods. I got to interview him for that. And I can tell you that he's not playing a role. This is actually what Ian McShane is like, which is pretty awesome. But I think we've seen it. And I think that he's just so well cast here, this is like an easy role for him. I mean, no one's challenging Ian McShane. And I don't think Ian McShane particularly wants to be challenged, which is fine. But I think that what's really going to make or break this movie is the casting of the Blood Queen, because that's what that's who Hellboy's going to be fighting. You know, this medieval sorceress brought back to life, and you know that'll decide whether or not this is an exciting, you know, like Cate Blanchett is Hella kind of movie, or if it's like a B or even C level kind of comic book video game adaptation. So we'll see who they cast. I'm very curious. It's going to be a big deal, and hopefully they'll get a good actress because, as I said, this project sounds pretty good. Ian McShane pushes it a little bit into like obvious territory, but hopefully they'll pull back with an interesting choice for the Blood Queen. All right, so the third story of the day, talking about casting, is I want to point out someone to you who is having a rough time, surprisingly, and it just underscores how tough it is in the industry. And sometimes you can make a choice, you can roll the dice, and it actually ends up working against you. I'm talking about Maika Monroe. I think that Maika Monroe is a very talented actress. I saw her first at Any Price, the Dennis Quaid, Zac Efron movie, and I thought she did a really nice job. And then she had a huge opportunity by starring in It Follows, which, nothing really came of that movie. I don't know what's taking that director so long with his follow-up, but, the capital is disappearing. But she used her It Follows capital to be an Independence Day resurgence. And that ended up, I think, being a big mistake for her. That movie was just a colossal failure. It took down almost everybody involved with it, except for Jeff Goldblum, who's Teflon. Well, he'd already signed up for Thor Ragnarok, so that really helped him considerably. But, sometimes, I had this conversation and this debate once with someone about what's better, a small role in a big blockbuster or a bigger role in a small movie. And I had argued that it was the big role in the smaller movie, because if you get good reviews, that's always going to help you get your next gig. But if you're associated with a clunker and you have very little control how a big blockbuster turns out, that's going to really hurt you. That's going to be difficult for you to move forward. I think there are some things that are too big to fail, like the next Jurassic World movie right now, a Marvel movie, just take the gig, right? And sometimes, you don't have the option, you should just take the big paycheck. But Independence Day, I think, really hurt Maika Monroe. And I'm surprised with her new project that she just signed on to, where she finds herself. Now, what she's going to do is she just signed on to play the glitzy best friend to Chloe Grace Moretz. Now, that seems bizarre to me. Chloe Grace Moretz, her career is going very poorly, both critically and at the box office. I can't believe, it should be reversed. The fact that Maika Monroe has to play second fiddle to Chloe Grace Moretz makes no sense to me. And this is for Neil Jordan's The Widow, which is a low-budget horror film for Sidney Kimmel Entertainment. Yikes! This is a really down-the-market project. Sidney Kimmel Entertainment continues to always make films, but they always make these weird films, and they're always employing people that really shouldn't be working, but, have some kind of, name left to them. Like Neil Jordan, right? But the way this is shaping up is so weird, because it's about Chloe Grace Moretz plays someone who finds a lost purse and returns it to a widow, played by Isabel Huppert. We're going to talk about that in just a second. And she befriends the widow only to find out that she's a dangerous lady. So, standard stuff. Let's see what Neil Jordan can do with it. And Maika Monroe is going to play Chloe Grace Moretz's best friend, who's like, she the best friend. She'll probably get killed in the movie or whatever. And she's like, maybe she warns her, maybe she doesn't warn her. You know the role. It's pretty typical. I hope Maika Monroe can do something with it. But I just can't believe that also Isabel Huppert is stuck in this movie. She's coming off of an Oscar nomination. She's a Golden Globe winner. And this is the best she can do. The crazy, dangerous widow, older widow in Neil Jordan's film for Sidney Kimmel Entertainment opposite Chloe Grace Moretz. Oh, it's tough out there. It's a tough business. I guess we have to give credit to both of them for just getting another gig. As Jack Nicholson so famously said, and I repeat all the time, an actor acts, and they're acting. Oh, it's so tough. It's a tough business. Just even once you get your foot in the door, or both feet in the door, it doesn't mean you're standing strong. All right, so let's get to the viewer question. This is a great viewer question. Really like it a lot, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it down below. This is from Hey J Hugs. Oh, hey, that's a great name. Okay, so Hey J Hugs says, "Hi Grace, question." It's kind of a very specific niche question, but something I've been wondering about. Love it. In your movie reviews, you often talk about the pace of a movie, but I'm wondering who controls the pace? Is it the director or the editor? Or could it be the writer? Or a combination of the three? Love morning movie news. Watch it every day. Thanks. Aw, that means so much, Jay. And this is great. This is a really great question. I talked about pacing the other day with Logan Lucky, and someone in the comments was like, "You don't know anything about movies. It's all about, the editor fix it," or, something. I forget what the person said. It was just, it was silly, because I think that there are a couple different lines of defense about pacing, and I think that you can fix it at many different stages with a movie. But I think that there's not just one person responsible for pacing, and allow me to explain. All right. So let's talk about it. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts about this down below. All right, so the first person, of course, the first person who's responsible for the pacing is the writer. Did they do a good job with this 3-act story structure that is integral to making writing a successful script? Is there enough story, right? Are enough things happening? Did they, tie up all the mysteries, or at least, give a satisfying conclusion? Obviously, you want it to read really well on the page. As we all know all too well, a lot of times scripts are greenlit, even though they have problems, and I think everybody assumes they can fix them on set. or maybe they don't identify the problems. But I think that really famous scripts, when you read them, and I would urge anyone who's interested in filmmaking at any capacity to familiarize himself with great scripts. If you read the scripts, you will see that they were fabulous to begin with. Like, for instance, Die Hard, right? The Godfather. Like, go read those classic, amazing scripts, and you'll see that they're absolutely perfect. All right, so anyway, and it's sad that there aren't a lot of great writers these days. Too often things are written by committee, and I think that that's a problem. All right, not that a script doctor can't fix things, but still, ideally, there should be great writers. Bill Dubuque, Ozark is so good, and The Accountant. But to be fair, sometimes people mess with scripts once they get them. All right, so anyway, the writer is the first line of defense with pacing. And then if they do a good job, hopefully nobody messes it up, right? So we're talking about how to do good pacing, not how pacing become undone. But just reverse this if you want to figure out what the problem could be. Then the next line of defense is the director. It's the director's job to make sure that this is coming together well, that they have good shots, that they can up the ante with the tension and the excitement, right? The visuals, making sure that, visuals are very important with the pacing. Like if you have boring visuals, it's going to be harder to keep your audience engaged. And sometimes if the script isn't as strong as it can be, you can still keep the audience on the edge of their seat with really strong visuals. Remember Hitchcock's famous, if a bomb just goes off, you only have the audience, an impact for a split second. But if you tell them where that bomb is and when it's going to go off, and nobody on screen knows, then you have them, and they're just, you have them, locked into the movie for that whole sequence. Very, very good lesson on the importance of suspense. Also, Hitchcock's rule of 3, just on a side note, if you really want the audience to pick something up, you have to introduce it 3 times, usually in different ways, visually, with dialogue, etc. It's very good rule. Watch Strangers on a Train to see that implemented brilliantly. So that's the director's job, to make sure that, the pacing there. Then also, I even think an actor can help with pacing. If you have a really exciting performance where you're doing really interesting things, or still waters run deep, there's a lot of nuance to your performance, you can keep the audience engaged, and that can help with pacing. But if you have an actor who's just kind of sitting there, and it's the director's job to keep an eye out for this, that can also hurt the pacing of a movie. It's just not interesting enough. And then finally, there's the editor. That's the last line of defense when it comes to fixing a movie. I think the Logan Lucky thing was about reshoots. I think sometimes this person said, an editor can fix, reshoots don't help with the pacing of a third act of a movie, the editor does, or whatever. Sometimes the editor just doesn't have enough material to work with and just can't work any magic. So sometimes they need that's why you do reshoots. You need to either, get more material or actually change the story, etc. And that's what I meant with Logan Lucky's third act. I felt there just wasn't enough there, and what was there was problematic. But an editor, a really good editor, if they have enough material, they can fix pacing as well. And one of the best examples of this is George Lucas's ex-wife, who fixed the first Star Wars movie. If you see his cut, it's a lot like the prequels. But luckily, this woman went in there and fixed it and won an Oscar for her work. So the editor is the last line of defense. But they can't work magic. They can't work with footage that isn't there. So they can't guarantee to fix any pacing problems, but they're very crucial as well. Now, the optimum situation is that all these people work together to create a really fantastic product. But you can see much of a team effort filmmaking is. And the director is supposed to oversee all of this, but occasionally the director doesn't know what they're doing, and that's when the producer comes in and takes it away from them, and they oversee the editing to try and fix a picture, and they bring in someone else sometimes to do the reshoots, as was the case with Rogue One, and Tony Gilroy coming in to fix what Gareth Edwards had messed up. So a very interesting situation, and I hope that gives you some insight not only to how you can fix pacing, but also just the structure and the politics and the chain of command and the different stages of making a film. All right, thank you so much for tuning in. That's today's Morning Movie News. Please write down below today's top 3 stories, Jay's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and of course, any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.